Today we're going to look at the political ideas of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. In particular, we're going to have a look at his idea that we are naturally good, but we are corrupted by society. But also that as we are corrupted by society, we are also enslaved by this society. We'll then look at Rousseau's answer for this, which is a direct democracy where we make laws according to the general will. This society will firstly lead us to be a less corrupt society, and second of all ensure that we are not enslaved. Finally, we'll look at a puzzling statement by Jean-Jacques Rousseau that if we disobey the laws we'll be forced to be free, and suggest that this in fact reveals Rousseau's novel view of freedom, but is not a license to tyranny. Now you'll remember from when we looked at Hobbes that Hobbes thought that there was this hypothetical situation called the state of nature, in which there was no sovereign state over us. And in this state of nature, due to the nature of mankind, our lives will be nasty, brutish and short. There's no morals in the state of nature. We will do whatever we need to do in order to protect ourselves. Rousseau feels that Hobbes wasn't actually looking at the state of nature, but rather civilized man, as Rousseau would call him. Rather, in order to look at the state of nature, Rousseau thought, you need to look back in time to a time prior to society and prior to a political state. So Rousseau takes us back to a time in which we are effectively, for want of a better phrase, cave people. Living on our own, Rousseau thought, and he said that in this society we would be naturally good. Right? Now, I just want to pause on this point a minute, because Rousseau says that we'll be naturally good but not naturally moral. Morality, Rousseau says, only comes into play when we need to live with other people. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's wife. In order for those two statements to be meaningful, there needs to be other people who have property and a neighbour, and your neighbour has to have a wife. Now, Rousseau thought in this early, original state of nature, mankind would live separate lives. They would live their lives according to two maxims. One, amour de soi, by which Rousseau meant self-love with regards to wanting to protect yourself, for no harm to come on your own. But secondly, this would be tempered by the fact that Rousseau thought we would live according to pity. That is to say that we wouldn't want to see suffering in another person. Consequently, the original state of nature for Rousseau is people living separate lives, depending on the will of no other person, so therefore radically free, but also good in the sense that they would not actually want to harm someone else. When there was a conflict, there would be a conflict over a specific thing, an apple, a tree, whatever. But it would be limited to that. We would have no desire to dominate or harm everyone else. That is the state of nature for Rousseau. So, naturally, mankind is radically free and naturally good. Not moral, but good. This is contrasted by Rousseau by the corruption that is induced by society. Society comes about because these individual atomized men come together in society in order to do tasks which they couldn't do on their own. To build buildings, for example. Now, this is good, Rousseau thinks, and also it has the good consequence of introducing morals. I mentioned a minute ago that Rousseau thinks that in order for morals to be relevant in society, you need a society, a group of individuals, and mankind coming together in this fashion brings just that. But he says there's a downside to coming together as society, and that is the fact that around the campfire in the evening, societies would start telling stories. They would start to entertain one another, and in this process they would want to look good in the eyes of other people. This process then continues to people wanting fancier clothes than other people, wanting more property, they want slaves, whatever. Things which make people look powerful to other people. Now, this has two effects. First of all, it corrupts us, because it makes us competitive against one another, but this is the important thing, it makes us unfree. It enslaves us, Because, in Rousseau's phrase, we start to live our lives through the eyes of others. We start to do things not because we want to do them necessarily, but because we want to look good to other people. It's here that the amour de soi, the self-love of which I spoke in the earlier section, turns into amour propre, vanity. And it's this vanity that corrupts us and enslaves us, because it leads us to things which we don't want and are unnatural to us. Can we recover this lost freedom? Rousseau says, in essence, we can't, but we can build something similar to it. And it's this construct of a new society in which we can live in political society and remain free, which Rousseau attempts to outline in a book entitled The Social Contract. In it, he says every man in society, and I use the word man deliberately here, all men in society need to contract to form a society together, and they have to explicitly state that they want to be part of this contract. Logically speaking, if someone refuses to consent to the legitimate power of government, then he can't be said to have to obey the laws of government. However, Rousseau says it's not enough to consent to government, but also you have to directly participate in it. You have to be both sovereign and subject. You have to participate in the making of the rules and the obeying of the rules. Consequently, Rousseau's republic is a direct democracy. All men need to go to the assembly and vote on issues themselves. They are not allowed to join members of parties, because Rousseau says this means that people represent their party and not themselves. You have to represent only yourselves and make laws for everybody. Rousseau says by giving yourself to everybody and making laws for everybody, we're all in fact are giving ourselves to no one and making laws for ourselves alone. Now, how does this deal with vanity though? Rousseau says that in order to be free, one needs to quiet the passions, not do what you want to do, rather than be free to do it. And he says in order to quell vanity, our decisions in society, in that direct democracy assembly, need to be attuned to the general will. Now, the general will for Rousseau is what is in everybody's best interests, rather than being in your interest. So, consequently, when I vote in the assembly, according to Rousseau, I must make my decision on every bit of legislation as to what is good for the entire republic, not what is good for me. This in turn will make legitimate laws which will dampen what I want, because I cannot go and make laws which directly benefit me. There's an intriguing quote near the end of The Social Contract which says, if one refuses to obey the laws of this sovereign power, which you'll remember is everybody, then you'll be forced to be free. Now, this quote has led some to think that Rousseau's providing a license to tyranny. I'm not sure that this is the case, and remember, this boils down to what Rousseau says freedom is. Now, what Rousseau is saying is that everybody should be able to represent themselves in the assembly, that they shouldn't have to be a member of any party, they should be able to represent themselves. Decisions should be made of what's in everybody's interests rather than any one group of people or any particular individual's basis, and that makes a legitimate law. If you refuse to obey that law, you will be forced to obey it. Now, that's not all that different to societies of which we live in today. If a legitimate law is made, we expect people to obey it. However, Rousseau thinks that making laws which apply to yourself is freedom. Freedom is not doing whatever vanity dictates that you do. Freedom is not about doing what you want to do or what your passions tell us to do. It's about making laws which get rid of your desires. So freedom is, as Rousseau says, the silence de la passion, the silence of the passions. That's freedom. That's why you can be forced to be free for Rousseau.